Hey CW Bio, Mr. Kennedy here. This is your chapter 15 and 16 lecture notes on Charles Darwin, the theory of evolution by natural selection and evolution of populations. We're going to break this up into a couple parts, at least two separate videos, because I don't want you to fall asleep, right? So let's get started with Charles Darwin and this idea of evolution. Charles Darwin, his theory of evolution by natural selection. Like, where did it come from? How did it get here? From where did it evolve? Um, Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, well, it's gone through a lot of evolution of its own, and it's in its current form is kind of a fundamental cornerstone in biology. When you look up the word evolution in a dictionary, the definition you're going to find is change in populations over time. And that's what I want you to remember as we go through all of this. Evolution is change in populations over time. How does that happen? And like, what kind of time frame are we talking about? Like a day, a month, like a million years? Like, I don't know. Well, the first thing that we have to deal with when it comes to evolution or change over time is that time frame. Most people dispute evolution by simply saying, the earth isn't that old and there's not enough time for evolution to occur. Geologists were the first people who actually proposed the earth is several, billion years old. They themselves haven't settled on an exact age of the earth because, well, the oldest rocks they can find are only about 4 billion years old. And there's a lot of speculation of like, well, was there another billion years before that rock formed, or maybe just a few 100 million years? There's no like hard evidence, right, that says like, yeah, this is exactly when the earth formed. So their speculation is that the earth is about 4 billion and some change in age. If we're talking about billions of years of time, then in theory, there would be enough time for a population to evolve. They also speculate that the planet itself, well, the way we see it today climatically is not the same as it was, throughout history. And if the climate has changed, then they speculated that, well, life has changed too. Using things like the fossil record, we've been able to track the appearance and disappearance of like tropical plants and ocean going creatures, which have kind of led to this idea that life has evolved over time. Many explanations about how species have evolved have been proposed, but Darwin's is the only one that's really kind of gained traction. Darwin came up with his ideas in evolution after traveling around the world on a ship named the HMS Beagle. He joined an exploration mission on the HMS Beagle in 1831 and literally sailed all the way around the world. So this ship leaves in 1831, comes back about 5 years later, and Darwin is exposed to, well, plants, animals, like you name it, that he has not seen before in his life. If you were alive in 1831 in England, like, Charles here, chances are you would live and die, basically live out your entire life without ever really going much farther than about 20 miles from home, right? Primary means of travel in 1831 was a horse. So yeah, like most people didn't travel. Anyways, so Darwin gets on this boat having like no concept of what like a palm tree is, or maybe like a zebra or a camel for that matter. And he travels across the globe and he starts to like see all these creatures and wonder like, where did they come from? And not only that, but he started to notice that a lot of these creatures have connections to things back home in jolly old England that are very similar. Like he found this thing in South America called a Patagonian hare. That's a fancy name for rabbit. And it looked like rabbits back home. So like, how did that rabbit get to South America? And why does it look like the rabbit back home? Okay. Probably his most famous stop was on the Galapagos Islands, just offshore of South America, off the western coast, where he was introduced to a group of birds that we now refer to as Darwin's finch. Darwin's finch are birds that basically like look similar enough to be considered related, but different enough to, well, like be specialized to a specific island on which they live. Darwin's question: how did this happen? Where did they come from? Why do they look like that? So, as the ship's naturalist, Darwin studied and collected all manner of biological and fossil specimens at every port he went to. His studies provided the foundation for his theory of evolution by natural selection. On the Galapagos Islands, he studied lots of species of animals and plants. Again, the most famous one, his finch, and the one that really provided the foundation for his theory of evolution by natural selection. These observations led Darwin to consider the populations and individual species could change over time, right? By looking at these birds, like they looked similar to each other, but yet they had some variation that made them specialized to the island that they lived on. Now, Darwin comes back from this trip, and he doesn't just like all of a sudden get down a piece of paper and pencil and start like writing all this stuff out that says, hey, like I've discovered evolution by natural selection. No, he didn't do that. He sat on all this data. I don't know if he literally sat on it, but okay, he didn't do anything with it for 20 years, 2 decades. So he basically sat on this stuff for 20 years and, refined his thinking or thought process along the way. Eventually, he comes across an essay written by an English economist, Thomas Malthus. Now, this guy's not a biologist, but what he proposed really pushed Darwin in a direction here, and you'll see why as I go through this. Malthus, he's an economist, and he says that human populations grow faster than the Earth's food supply. Why do we care? Why does that matter? Well, if you're the smartest, most intelligent, human on the planet, and yet you're going to allow your population to grow faster than your food supply, I'm betting that all lower life forms are going to do the same thing. They're going to reproduce at really, really fast rates, faster than their food supply can. And when that happens, there's going to be a problem. There's going to be a competition for resources. There's going to be a battle between the haves and the have-nots. And, if you can't get food, you're going to be eliminated from the population, just like that. Okay? So how did this help Darwin? Well, here's how it helped. He knew that many species produce large numbers of offspring, yet not a single species had completely overrun the earth. So to him, that says, look, things are making lots of babies, but we're not being overrun with any one thing. So why is that? Well, because life is hard, right? Life is not easy. It's a struggle to survive. So as sad as it sounds, you might have lots and lots of babies, but they're not all going to survive to adulthood and reproduce on their own. That's what Darwin realizes. Wow, okay, yeah, that's what's up. Only some individuals survive the competition for food, water, space to live, and produce offspring of their own. Okay, sound familiar? Does to me. Kind of sounds like natural selection, but let's follow the rest of this story. Darwin also observed that when looking at the world around him, that, we don't all look the same. And that's true of people all the way down through population after population, cats, dogs, fish, frogs, and everything else in between. We're not all identical. And some of what we have that we see in the mirror, well, it could be passed on from one generation to the next, hair color, eye color, stuff like that. So these things are called variations. And to be simply, blunt, if you've got advantageous adaptations, then you're probably going to reproduce at a higher rate than an individual or a thing that does not have advantageous adaptations. It kind of, maybe works like this. So maybe I have a field of ground squirrels, okay? And in this field of ground squirrels, I've got variation in I don't know, work ethic or something. And so I've got like this group over here that's super industrious. They work really hard. They collect lots of food. They dig good tunnels and they're protected from predators and all of that. And then at the opposite end, I got, Joe lazy squirrel that doesn't do anything. Okay. So do the math, right? If I'm super like motivated and I'm like, working really hard, I'm going to have lots of food to eat and I'll be super healthy and all that kind of good stuff, right? If I'm at the opposite end and I do nothing, well, I'm going to starve to death because there's no food. No one's going to look at me and go, I feel sorry for you. Here's some food. Like if I'm not going out there like collecting food for myself, that's it. If I don't dig a good burrow to get away from predators, that's it. Like the predator will take me out. That's just how it works, right? So, that work ethic, maybe it's, a heritable variation. And so all those like industrious ground squirrels, they're going to go off, they're going to reproduce at a higher rate, they're going to be healthy, their genes will dominate the future generation. And the ones that aren't like that, they're going to be eliminated from the population. Studying variations in individuals like this is not new. This is something that humans have been doing literally for hundreds, if not thousands of years through the domestication of like farm animals and things. We can literally look at nature and go, yep, I want a cow that like produces lots of milk. So we'll go through a herd of cattle and we'll pick like the cows that produce the most milk and we'll only allow those to breed so that the next herd produces even more milk. This is what's called artificial selection, and humans are the only species that can do it, right? So if we can do this, Darwin's thought was maybe there's a force similar to humans that does it for lower life forms. And that's where nature steps in. Natural selection is, in Darwin's mind, a mechanism for change in populations, the same way the human eye is a mechanism for change in populations in artificial selection. In artificial selection, I'm in charge of picking the individuals that will reproduce based on a goal I want, like a cow that produces lots of milk. So I'm just going to breed those. Okay, well, in terms of natural selection, nature's in charge. So remember my ground squirrels? If you're a lazy ground squirrel and you're not out there trying to get food, well, nature's not going to feed you, right? Only the ones that are industrious, that are working really hard and digging those tunnels to get away from predators, those are the ones that are going to survive and reproduce. The one that doesn't dig, the one that doesn't try to find food is simply going to starve or be picked off by a predator. So according to Darwin, right, when organisms with favorable variations are born, okay, they will survive, reproduce, and pass their variations on to future generations. Okay, so that's the deal. Now here's the sad part. Like you're not in control of like your parents. Now you can't pick your parents. You can't pick what you inherit from your parents. So a lot of these variations we inherit, well, for lack of a better way to put it, I like to call them lucky birthmarks, if you will. Like you're just born with favorable adaptations or you're not in the plant and animal world, right? So organisms without those favorable variations are less likely to survive and reproduce. That's the sad part. So as a result, okay, favorable adaptations versus non-favorable adaptations, whatever you inherit, as a result, each generation will consist largely of offspring from parents with just those favorable variations that aid in survival. So over time, right, all those, lazy squirrels, like all their genetics will be gone and you'll just have a whole field full of industrious squirrels. Here's some examples, okay? Let's look at these fish. So Darwin, to try to explain natural selection, proposes like it might play out like this in another species, like here's fish. Darwin proposed that fish, like all other living things, according to Malthus, will reproduce in numbers greater than what the environment can support. So organisms produce more offspring than nature can support. So we got these fish and big piles of eggs down here, right? Well, in any population, okay, variation also exists. So in these fish, as you look close, you can see that there's big fish, there's, striped fish, there's non-striped fish, there's thin fish. Like, the fish are not all clones. All right. Some fish may have like variation in color, size, speed they can swim. Well, if you employ a selection pressure now, like a predator, individuals with certain useful variations, like, I don't know, camouflage or you could swim fast, are going to survive and be able to reproduce, whereas the ones that are not camouflaged or don't swim fast are going to be lunch for the predator. If you're lunch for the predator, well, that means that, your genes die with you. Okay. So over time, the offspring of successive generations of these fish will start to look like only those fish that have the advantageous adaptations. Maybe in this case, they're striped and well camouflaged and swim really fast. Okay, so that's how this works, right? Now, there's lots of other evidence that scientists have collected over time to further support and bolster Darwin's ideas. Much of this evidence is subject to interpretation, which means that, everybody doesn't agree on the evidence that I'm about to propose to you, simply because, one of the primary issues with evolution is we can't literally sit back and watch it happen. The reason we can't really sit back and watch it happen is because humans don't live long enough. The short lifespan of a human really makes it hard to comprehend the time that is necessary for evolutionary processes to occur. And it's really hard for you to watch evolution happening from beginning through middle to end. Most of the time, we're just kind of somewhere in between. Almost all of today's biologists will accept the theory of evolution by natural selection at some level. Okay, even if they don't believe it fully, there's at least some aspect of it that they can relate to and agree with. Okay, so let's kind of go through what it means to evolve and how this passes on from one generation to the next. This idea of evolution or change over time is really centered on a species, a population's adaptations. So remember, if you're born with advantageous adaptations, then the likelihood of you becoming lunch for a predator goes down. So in Darwin's theory of evolution, we kind of get a better understanding of how these adaptations might be passed on to future generations. According to Darwin's theory, adaptations in species develop over many generations. And learning about the adaptations of a mole rat might be a good example for us to kind of look at and how, this population changed over time. So this is, the theoretical ancestor of today's naked mole rat. It's an African rock rat. The African rock rat has a lot of, structural and physiological similarities to a mole rat. If we go back, generations, it's altogether plausible that this could be how the mole rat started. Can we guarantee that? No, but it's at least a theory. Okay, so in the ancestral rats, it's thought that, well, not all the rats are identical. There's variation in the population, and some of them may have avoided predators better than others because of their, teeth size or claws and how they use them to defend themselves or maybe burrow underground. The ancestral rats that survived predation passed their variations on to their offspring, and after lots of generations of doing so, most of the population's individuals would have those specific adaptations that, help them avoid being eaten by a predator. And now you can see we've got this mole looking like thing that's living underground and reproducing successfully. And as it continues to live underground and reproduce this way, natural selection, in theory, produced the modern mole rat all the way down to its giant claws and itty-bitty eyes, blindness, and it, short tails, the works, and it lives underground. So all of these things are adaptations that we now see in a mole rat that are theoretically passed down from one generation to the next as a result of natural selection. Here's some other examples. Mimicry is an adaptation that can arise from natural selection. Mimicry is a structural adaptation that enables one species to resemble another. And there are different kinds of mimicry. We won't worry about like defining Mullerian versus Batesian or whatever. We'll just call it all mimicry, okay? In one form of mimicry, a harmless species has adaptations that result in a physical resemblance to a harmful species. Again, I like to refer to this as being born with a lucky birthmark. Like, maybe you're born kind of looking like a wasp or a bee. Like, you don't have control over like the black and yellow like fur color that you're going to get or hair color that you're going to get, from your parents. It just happens, right? And because you kind of look like something that's harmful, well, other creatures will leave you alone because maybe that actual harmful thing did something to them, like sting them on the nose. And so now anytime they see something that's black and yellow, they're like, bro, don't mess with that. You're going to get stung on the nose, and that's not fun, right? So it's a lucky birthmark. Predators will avoid harmful looking species, and they'll avoid you too if you look like one. There's another case of mimicry where two harmful species might actually look like each other, and in both cases, predators will leave you both alone, like yellow jacket, hornets, honeybees, and other species of wasps all look similar, so it kind of becomes a carte blanche. Anything that kind of has that body shape and stripes, like predators don't want to mess with you because maybe one of them at some point, like I said, got stung, okay? Predators will learn quickly to avoid an organism with that general appearance. Here's another adaptation. We call it camouflage. So yeah, lucky birthmark. If I'm a frog born in a stand of green grass and reeds and I happen to be green, then it's just lucky that I was born green. If I was born brown, that would be a bummer because I would stick out like a sore thumb and my chances of reproducing would go way down, okay? So it's just a matter of you, again, being born with that lucky birthmark, that variation that you picked up from your parents that allows you to blend in with your surroundings. So if you're lucky and you get it, then that's a advantageous adaptation that can be passed on to future generations and increase your survivorship. All right. The last one that I want to share with you is physiological adaptations. And this is one that occurs in like bacteria. So like bacteria can evolve really rapidly because they have a really short generation time, like literally measured in minutes. And probably the best example of bacterial evolution is in the development or evolution of antibiotic resistance. I'll bet everybody watching this video has had to take an antibiotic at some point in their life. If when you take your antibiotic, you take into consideration what the antibiotic does, to the bacteria, you'll understand this physiological adaptation. You see, in bacteria, there are traits that are heritable, just like there are in people, cats, dogs, fish, and frogs, and everything in between. And in bacteria, some bacteria are super strong, bugs we'll call them, and others are maybe moderate, and others are like super weak. So when you take your antibiotic, the antibiotic will kill immediately the weak and then start working on the moderate bacteria. The strong ones are going to be the ones that like you got to take that antibiotic for like the full 10 to 15 days before you can get to them. Unfortunately, not everybody takes their antibiotics like they're supposed to. Some people will only take their antibiotics until they feel better, and then they save the bottle on the shelf so that they don't have to go to the doctor the next time. And what that does is it kills off the weak and the moderate bacteria that were making you feel lousy, but leaves the strong behind. And sometimes you even create mutations in the strong that make them even stronger after exposing them to that antibiotic. Then those strong bacteria either will reproduce in you or they will escape your body as you cough and sneeze or just breathe, and they'll make somebody else sick. And as they reproduce in you again or that other person, you start feeling lousy. So then you go, well, I'm going to go get those antibiotics that I saved and I'm going to start taking those again. But lo, they don't work because you created a superbug. You created a bug that is now resistant to that antibiotic. That antibiotic will no longer kill it. That's change in that population of microbes over time, which is evolution, physiological evolution. So today we have microorganisms out there that like powerful antibiotics like penicillin will no longer kill, right? It's a thing. We even have other species like insects and plants that pesticides and herbicides can't kill because of the exact same scenario playing out in them. Those are sometimes called super bugs, again, for the insects, or super weeds for the plants, right? All right, ladies and gents, so that is your introduction to Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution by natural selection. When we come back for part 2, chapter 16 of your book, we're going to look at how populations evolve. I'm Mr. Kennedy, and I'll see you next time.